Program Specialist for UNESCO Multi-Sectoral Regional Office in Beijing. And a very warm welcome to everyone to the webinar, Bringing Living Heritage to the Classroom. This is organized within the framework of the 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. So this webinar primarily targets East Asian teachers of UNESCO associated schools. But of course, there are other stakeholders who are interested in this webinar. So this is also your place if you are not teachers from associated schools, or you are not teachers at all. And also, if you are not from any of the East Asian countries, then you are also very welcome. The advantage for the East Asian countries is we try to provide the simultaneous translation services, which hopefully will make the webinar more inclusive for those who do not speak English. So this webinar is brought to you by the UNESCO Multi-Sectoral Regional Office in Beijing and the International Information and Networking Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage, ICHCAP. ICHCAP has been a very dear friend and a very strong collaborator with us during this initiative to promote intangible cultural heritage in education for the past few years. You will hear from the Director General of ICHCAP later. And we also like to acknowledge support by Asia Pacific Cultural Center for UNESCO, ACCU, Mongolian National Commission for UNESCO, and UNESCO International Center for Creativity and Sustainable Development, ICCSD. So before we begin, I just have very simple rules that I would like everyone to follow. If you would like to have questions, please type the question in the Q&A session section. You can see that in the on the bar below the bottom of your screen. We hope that there would be we will be able to have discussion, but then to really maneuver between 4 or 5 different languages, it was a little complicated. But by all means, please type the questions on the Q&A session, and our interpreter, even in your own language, and our interpreter would be able to help to get that into English so that our facilitators can respond to it. I would like to also introduce our facilitators, Vanessa Aquiles and Linina Putitan, who both are accredited facilitators under the 2003 Convention and who have also been working very closely with our ICHN Education Initiative. So without further ado, I would like to ask my colleague Tana to share a video remarks of our director, Professor Shahbaz Khan. He regrets of not being able to be here today because of prior commitment, but he would still like to share his greetings. So Tana.
Distinguished guests, dear ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. On behalf of UNESCO Multi-Sectoral Regional Office for East Asia, it is my great pleasure to welcome you today at today's webinar, Bringing Living Heritage to the Classroom in East Asia. To begin with, let me extend a very warm welcome to all participants on behalf of UNESCO. I also wish to acknowledge and express my sincere gratitude to the International Information and Networking Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage, as we know, ICHCAP, for co-hosting the webinar. Also, my sincere thanks to Asia Pacific Culture Center for UNESCO, ACCU, to the Mongolian National Commission for UNESCO, and the UNESCO International Center for Creativity and Sustainable Development, ICCSD. Thank you for providing generous support to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, it is well known that education plays a valuable role in safeguarding living heritage. also known as Intangible Cultural Heritage, or ICH for short. The UNESCO 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage includes a very important reference to transmission, particularly through formal and non-formal education, as an important safeguarding measure. It has recently also become more and more evident that bringing living heritage in education also makes education more relevant to students and helps them achieve better results. Linking heritage and education is indeed mutually beneficial. As the only United Nations agency with a mandate in both culture and education, UNESCO is in a unique position to promote initiatives that build on the expertise of both sectors. Throughout the world, integrating living heritage in education is a major priority for UNESCO regional offices. Offices which used to be education offices, but also now multi-sectoral regional offices and offices which are at the national level. So bringing intersectoral initiatives of education and culture are helping us advance SDGs. While some experiences exist in the field, many countries still do not recognize integrating intangible cultural heritage in education systems. And in some cases, they do not know how to do so. UNESCO has recently spent great efforts in working with partners, notably with our Category 2 centers, ICHCAP and FCU, in Asia Pacific to develop a concrete approach to bring living heritage in classroom and pilot it in different countries. In this approach, we place teachers at the center and place living heritage at the core of their work. Yet, in order to make this successful in its implementation, there are many other stakeholders who need to take active part, such as policymakers, school managers, resource focal points from local communities, students, and very importantly, their families. I hope this webinar will help you gain the knowledge and skills which can help integrate living heritage into your activities in school. I hope that the experiences shared by those who are already using this approach will certainly bring new inspiration. Also, as you come from different countries, this webinar should bring the dialogue among you so that we can learn from each other, learn across borders, and eventually there would be an international community of practice which can mobilize more teachers and stakeholders to adopt this very important approach. I thank you for your participation, and I strongly believe you will become the real practitioners of integrating ICH into education at all levels. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you to dear Professor Khan. And now I would like to invite Mr. Ji Sung Kim, the Director General of ICHCAP, to deliver his opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ji Sung Kim, the Director General of ICHCAP. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Mr. Chavez Khan, the Director of UNESCO Beijing Office, for co-organizing this meaningful event. And I also would like to appreciate all the teachers for attending despite their busy schedule. It is a pleasure to meet you all today. For the last 4 years, ICHCAP has operated the ICH and education project called Bringing Living Heritage to the Classroom in the Asia Pacific in cooperation of UNESCO regional offices. The 2003 Convention on the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage emphasizes the importance of education and draws attention as a new priority in the field of intangible cultural heritage. In particular, we would like to pursue the integrated approach to ICH and education to ensure safe transmission to future generations. And we have observed that the living heritage can be a good educational material for the interesting and colorful teaching and learning plans for the teachers. I hope that this webinar will be a special opportunity for the teachers to use a variety of ICH elements in the classroom through active discussions and exchanging various ideas with questions and answers. In addition, it would be very appreciated if you could continue to support UNESCO and ICHCAP's ICH and education project. Lastly, I would like to thank the two UNESCO facilitators of ICH capacity building, Vanessa Achilles and Linina Putitan, who will lead today's presentation and discussion, and Dr. Duong Bik Han, Program Specialist for Culture in UNESCO Beijing Office. I hope all of you have a fun and meaningful time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim, for your kind words. So now we finished the official opening session of this webinar. Before we move to the main content of the webinar, I just wanted to check if everything is working okay with the translator, because we got a comments that there is a little bit, maybe some language, original language or something that still can be heard. But I hope that everything is okay. And if there is some issue, please again use the Q&A function to let us know, and we would be able to respond to it. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Kim, again. And without further ado, I would like to pass the torch to our facilitators, Vanessa and Linina, who will lead us through this exciting 3 hours. And by the end, we hope that you will be all convinced about this approach and you all know how to actually use that in your schools. Over to you, Vanessa and Nina.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to you. Thank you very, very much for being here. It's a pleasure to be able to be part of this seminar. I am Vanessa, and I have been working on issues related to heritage, and especially living heritage and schools for over 10 years now. And it's always very exciting. And I have the feeling that it's like being part of a big family in Asia, to be with you today to share what we have learned so far and what we have discovered. And for 10 years, I've also been working with Nina. Would you like to say hello?
Hello, everyone. สวัสดีค่ะ. So I'm Linina. You can call me Nina, and born and raised in Bangkok, Thailand. So yes, like Vanessa, I have been working with Vanessa and Han and also many colleagues here for so many years on many projects related to living heritage, especially with community involvement approach. So yes, I think that's my brief introduction. Back to Vanessa.
So yeah, it's very exciting to be with you and to continue this journey. I mean, you have seen that the workshop is called Bringing Living Heritage to the Classroom, which means that we are here talking about both the culture part and the education part, which are two of the big pillars of UNESCO's work, and we are trying to bring them together. And UNESCO has been doing a lot of work, intersectoral work for many years. And I think this particular methods that we will present to you today is one of a very practical and quite successful one that we hope you will be able to implement. So in this workshop, we are talking about living heritage. So we will explain a little bit more what we mean by living heritage. And we will show you quite detailed methods, step by step, which can be applied, which can be changed also. You can adjust it to your needs, or everything is always flexible. but at least it provides you a structure. And I would like to emphasize that this method doesn't come just from our imagination. It's something that is really grounded in many years of project experimentation in Asia, in Europe, in many countries. And we have been able to identify steps that worked for teachers and for community people, and try to structure it around their reality and what they were doing and what was working and not working. And you will see, we will present you a number of examples. We have many examples. Some of them we have selected to put in this webinar. All these webinars are real. They are not invented by us. They're something that we have documented from teachers and people. It doesn't mean that they would be totally aligned to your context, but they have happened and they have worked. Excuse me. So we have organized with UNESCO many trainings in the past, and we realized that when you see the whole methodology at the beginning, it may sound a bit daunting, a bit complicated. And many of the teachers we have worked with told us the same at the beginning. But then going step by step, they managed to actually implement real lessons. Yeah. And we have a lot of feedback from the teachers, from the people in the community, and most importantly for the teacher here, from the students, feedback from the students. And overall, we can say that everyone was quite happy with this process. So yes, it would be work. And yes, it would be effort. And yes, it may sound a bit complicated, but we would like to reassure you that for many teachers already, the journey was worth the effort. So we would like you to keep that in mind when we speak to you. Don't be scared by it, just try it. And then you can start small and then later by later get experience and continue again. So, this, as I mentioned earlier, these methods come from several projects that have been run. And through some of these projects, we have also developed materials that are available. We have a number of resource kits. Some of them are, I think, being translated. They are available in English. There is also material that has been translated, including some video cartoons, video animations that are quite short snapshots of different aspects of this process that we will present. I think you were given the links already, and we would like to encourage you to watch them or watch them again. And so there are many resources that can help you through this journey beyond this 3-hour webinar. As Han mentioned, we encourage you, we would like to, despite the technical difficulties, like the technical complexities and the language complexity, we hope that this webinar will be active. And please feel free to share your experience. Even if you are not following these methods, what we have noticed is that many teachers already are integrating in one way or another living heritage in their class. Many of them don't necessarily realize it. They don't call it that way, and it's perfectly fine. So please, if you think that you're doing something similar, please share it, because I think the word of a teacher is worth much more to another teacher than what we are saying. So with that in mind, I first would like to ask everyone a question. We will try to keep this active. I was talking earlier about resources, and we would like to know, actually, if you managed to watch the video animation in the past. So could you please click quickly to tell us if you have watched them, if you haven't watched them yet, or if you have watched some of them. Okay, so I'll give you a few more seconds and then we will end this poll. Thank you to all of you who have answered already. So I think you can see the results on your screen at the moment. So it seems that actually a large majority of those who have answered have watched at least some of the animations. We hope you enjoyed them. We hope you found them interesting or entertaining. And if you haven't done so, of course, we would like to encourage to watch them. If you have watched them, maybe at some stage in this discussion, please tell us what you think about it. What you learned from that, or what it woke up in you when you were watching them. Did it inspire you or not? So with this brief introduction, or would anyone actually would like already to tell us what you think? Would anyone would like to comment? In the chat, or if you want, you can also take the floor, maybe. No one?
I think if anyone wants to speak, you can. I hope there would be a way for you to raise your hand and we can click the allow to talk button, then you would be able to speak.
Yeah, but I don't see at the moment anyone asking for the floor. So anyway, we do hope you enjoyed them. And having said that, then I will pass the floor to Nina, who will tell us a little bit more about living heritage.
Thank you, Vanessa. So here. Oops. Okay. So what now, of course, when we're talking about bringing living heritage to school, the first question is, what is living heritage? And we were hoping that you have watched or seen some of the animation, because they would give you information about what living heritage. But the question is, what is living heritage? And the second question is, why is it important for schools, for students?
You are muted, Nina.
Oh.
I can hear you.
Oh. Okay, so how about other people?
I can hear you too, Nina.
I think maybe my computer selectively just mute myself for Han. Okay, so I will continue. But please let me know if other people have trouble hearing me too. But you know what's the most scary thing? The scary thing is I've been talking for like 15 minutes only to realize that I'm already offline, like the internet is bad. That has happened before. Okay, so let's go into the first question. Why is living heritage called living heritage? So let me go to the second question just to launch. So can you please click and try to answer? Why is intangible heritage also called living heritage? This is a pretty new kind of change in the terminology. We have been calling it in the beginning folklore, and then intangible cultural heritage, and now it's also called living heritage. So 9 people have participated and coming up more. So we have 72 participants today. Please join and let's see why you think it is a reason. Okay, wow, 28 now. 28 people have participated and more. Okay, I think right now, just looking at the visuals, the most popular answer is C, because it can evolve through time depending on the context of the people practicing it. B, because if it is not practiced, it disappears. And then A, because it includes the practices of living human beings. Wow, this is a tricky question, Vanessa. But it's meant, like we said, like there's no right or wrong, like absolute answers, right? Vanessa, is actually for us to think about it, like why do we call it living heritage? So basically there is a connection or interconnectedness between the word intangible and living. right? So yes, I think the answers are correct because it can evolve through time depending on how we human beings who practice it, want to change it or adapt it to our new needs, to our new environment, etc. And it includes the practices of living human beings. Yeah, because of course, it has to be practiced in the moment. There are some cultural practices that are no longer continued today. For example, mummification, like the very traditional Egyptian mummification, that would not be called a living heritage in our era, but back then it would be, right? Now it's just called a cultural practice, a tradition, etc. And if it's not practiced, it disappears. That's right. So I think the answers here kind of plant, the important keywords for all of us to think about. Okay, thank you so much for your participation. And now let's go back to discussing more about this. Okay. Now, we talked about living heritage, but we wonder, because even though the 2003 convention has coined the term intangible cultural heritage, even though the curriculum talks about living heritage, etc., but it is most important for all of us to, bring it down, bring it back to the local context, bring it down to the people, to the communities, to your daily life. So we wonder, how do you call living heritage in your own language? And that is very important because we want to also expand the concepts of vocabulary of these concepts. Let me show you the Slido page. So just a moment. So just any quick words in your head right now. Think of what are the words, how would you call, living heritage in your own language, in your own dialect. Okay. So this, when you look at the screen, you can see that there will be a QR code. You can basically use your phone to scan it and then freely type in the answer. And these are some of the examples that Vanessa and I have, included. So in Thai, we can call it Wattanatham. In the northern part and also in the northeastern, we would call Hit Hoi. And then in French, Vanessa, you might want to pronounce them. Vanessa, can you say it in French and in German?
Oui, bien sûr. Vous m'entendez? On appellerait donc la traduction, the direct translation would be patrimoine culturel immatériel. Mais nous pouvons aussi, we can also talk about patrimoine vivant.
Thank you. So those are some of the examples from us. So there's no right or wrong, and you don't even have to think about the term that your government or the textbook uses. It can be your own village, in your own school, in your own family. How do you call this concept of living heritage? So we have seen some words in Chinese and in Korean, and also in Japanese. I see also like a long phrase or a long sentence. So I would be curious on how you would explain to us. Okay, so we have 11 participants at the moment. Maybe I can also share the link itself to you too, if that would be easier. Just a moment. Because some people might not have their phone ready with them. So here in the chat, for those of you who want to join, you can look at the chat in the chat box right now of our webinar. You can click on it and then join in this poll, word cloud. The big word, it means that many people type the same word or same answer. That's why, the size shows the popularity of that word. We have in Mongolian language too. Okay, so we have 13, 14 more joining. So in the meanwhile, may I ask the person who typed this to explain in to tell us what it means, or even the interpreter, if you can help us. What does this sentence or phrase mean? Who typed this phrase? Would you like to share? Or the interpreter, you can also help me translate quickly.
I think the issue is the interpreter is only able to speak for people to hear within that language room, Nina. So that would not be.
two-way.
But maybe some participants who speak English who would like to maybe give it a try.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, if the interpreter saw it on the screen and they translated into their language, all the attendees in all channels can hear it as well. So it shouldn't be a problem.
No, but for what Nina mean was for everyone to hear the word. Yeah, and that would not be possible.
Okay. It's all right. I guess we're experimenting with super multiculturalism approach today. Or Tana,
sure, I can
translate. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can translate
for me,
the
actually,
Chinese
and
one.
Vanessa.
Yeah, this sentence is I don't know how to describe it. It seems like intangible cultural heritage is kind of very lively item.
I see. I like that definition. So it's about being lively. It's about being vibrant. And we also have in Nepali, and then in many other languages here too. So yes, so the purpose of this, when we see this kind of word cloud coming up, we can see the diversity on how, all of us call it. And also we would like to, encourage all of you as teachers to be mindful of this concept when you bring it to your school too, in your lessons. Always, when you explain the concept of ICH or living heritage based on the convention or based on your own local policy, etc., or your textbooks, always make sure that you connect back to your students and to the community and to the village by asking them that how do they call it. So in that, it will build on their existing knowledge and also foundation, and then they can connect and use whatever that you can provide them as additionally. So let me go back to the slide quickly. Thank you so much for the participation. And now here. So when we know how the words are called, now let's take a look at the three most important concepts of living heritage. The first one, living heritage, I will also use ICH or intangible cultural heritage interchangeably. But there are many kinds of living heritage. We call it domains, but please do not be fixated or worried too much about this. This is only a guideline for you as a tool to help you understand what are examples of living heritage. And in each country, they have different domains. So first one could be oral traditions like legends, could be stories, could be poems, idioms, etc. The second, performing arts, they're like singing, dancing, musical performance. The third, social practices, they're about festivals, ceremonies, rituals. And this one, knowledge and practices concerning nature, it might seem a little bit like, wow, what does it mean? But basically, it can include, for example, horoscope, astrology, or the knowledge of how to navigate themselves at night using, the stars, the map of the stars. Or it also about understanding different seasons tied to agriculture, and also food cooking and food preservation. Traditional craftsmanship that's very straightforward, like textiles. It can also be about, carpentry, etc., and games and sports and more. So these are just some of the, example of categories. And of course, it has to be living, meaning that it has to still be practiced today. In the concept of safeguarding, we also include the category of living heritage that is dwindling, meaning that it is fading. it is being endangered, or maybe it's already gone, but in the memory, in the mind of the people who still value it, they still remember, for example, how this festival used to exist. With those values still in mind, people can try to revitalize or revive it back. So within this concept or definition, it will still be considered as living heritage. The most important thing that you have to understand is that all these definitions, all of these concepts, all of these words actually is not a rule, it's not a law. It's actually more about people. And the convention or the concepts of living heritage focuses on people, meaning that the people who feel connected to that specific living heritage. And they can define how much they want to change or keep part of their living heritage. They just want to have that right. And that is about making sure that the living heritage will be continued and transmitted in the way that serve their needs and is appropriate for, according to their meanings and values. So the communities, it's very loosely defined, but it means that whoever feel that this is about them, the living heritage is about them. And when we talk about community, it doesn't have to be defined by a specific village or a specific school or a province or a country. It can be anyone. For example, we can have a community of beer culture, drinking beer. So that are many people in many countries, right? It's not limited or reserved for only group of people in one place. Or you can talk about Songkran, which is water festival in ASEAN countries, Ramayana, etc. In East Asia can also be about falconry and also certain kind of nomadic lifestyle. So the point is, how do they transmit it to their younger generations, and they will decide how that living heritage will look like. What does the word safeguard mean? Safeguard means, yes, someone raised their hand. I saw someone. Okay, maybe
It
I
was
will.
taken down straight away.
Okay,
so we can,
right.
yeah.
So, and also safeguard, which is also a part of our webinar, like even though we're talking about school and education, but you know that you as teachers and educators, you take a really, really important role in safeguarding, because you can bridge the gap between living heritage, the community, and the youth, the students at your school. So you can do it through education. You can use school curriculum activities, extracurricular activities, all kinds of things through education and school, whether formal or informal, to share, should share about the meanings and values of certain living heritage that are meaningful to the students and the communities. So with that, that is the three main concepts about living heritage. And then, now, the word living heritage is also tied to certain other concepts as well. When we talk about ICH, we talk also about sustainable development. Sustainable development means whatever meaning that you're developing in the current time, but also thinking that you will spare some of the resources for the future generation too. For example, you don't use up all the trees or plants in your generation only. When you produce something, you think about what the future, will it be sustainable sources? Will there be materials? And sustainable development embraces many kinds, whether it's about natural, environmental development. It can also be about economic. It can be about social and cultural development too. So ICH is linked to sustainable development and global citizenship, which we will not go into details of what this global citizenship is. And there is specific course on that you can do. But now we're linking about teaching and activities at school. We can link it to ICH, how we can look at this, for example, agricultural practices through various dimensions and angles of various disciplines. It can be from engineering, it can be about social studies, it can be about history, etc., biology, science. And then you compare discover and compare practices from multiple communities. What are the shared heritage? What are the connections and the interlinkages between different peoples and different practices? And how do we encourage mutual appreciation and respect for one another? Okay. And then,
Nina, maybe
yes.
before you go into that, there's a question for you in the Q&A. May I ask if an item has been broken down in the process of inheritance and now it is restored as an ICH?
Broken down in the process of inheritance and now it is restored. What I'm trying to understand this question. What do you mean, like item broken down, like as in like a cultural object or a tool? Or okay, I would just try to you can share your questions more, but if you meant for number one, if the word item means a tangible object, like for example a musical instrument, if it's broken, wait, is it broken down or broken? Can you share, can you elaborate this question a little bit further so that I can understand it better? But if you're talking about, for example, a big intangible cultural heritage element, like a big practice, a big umbrella, for example, a festival that has many other smaller elements. For example, this festival requires craftsmanship. It also has religious belief. That's why people do this festival to, for religious purposes. There's also food cooking to serve people at the festival, etc. So all of these subcategories of intangible cultural heritage is all considered as the big umbrella of intangible practice, because one domain is always connected to another. But if your question meant, for example, a tangible object, like for example, a musical instrument that is that has been practiced, but now in the process of inheriting it down from generation to generation, and suddenly it's actually kind of broken, or it's not being practiced anymore, it can be restored as an intangible cultural heritage. But what we call as intangible cultural heritage is more not about the object, but it's more about the meanings, values of why people practice and do that musical performance. Why do they do that music? What does that musical instrument look like? What is the history of it? How is it used? What are the occasions? So all of these can be part of the intangible cultural heritage. And also the process of restoring it is also part of it. I saw that Han would like to help with this question too. Oh, you already typed?
Because Mark is always out of the thing. You are doing excellent response, Nina. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, please ask more questions like this. Thank you. All right, and the other is about PPT. I hope that Tana can also share in the chat.
Sure, I'll try to share. Yes, if the size is there.
Right. So shall I continue, Vanessa? Yeah. Okay. So now we understand briefly about the concepts of living heritage is interconnected concepts. Now let's talk specifically about teaching, right? Teaching about or with. Now, what does it mean about or with? About is you teach about that thing. For example, you teach about that traditional music, traditional musical performance. So you talk about why people practice it. That's the origin, the meaning, the value. How do they do it? What are the steps? How do they perform it? So these could be about teaching about. Now, with mean that you don't directly teach your courses are not about traditional music, but it could be, for example, about biology. Like, how do you choose the right coconut shell to make that fiddle? Right? So you want to teach about the biology of coconut. How do you plant it? What are the uses of the coconut tree and coconut shell? And part of it is that you can use it to make this traditional musical instrument. So you teach biology with or through the living heritage, which is that traditional musical instrument or performance. So in this process, you can see that it's not like directly about, but it's so creative in a way that people, I mean, the students will be able to develop critical thinking and also to develop their competency in making connections and interconnectedness between various things about their daily living heritage and also about, you know, certain competencies in other subjects. Okay. And next one. So this is a very specific example that Vanessa, right, and I had done years ago. Is about how do we integrate ICH or living heritage in education for sustainable development. And in this particular example, we did with 4 pilot countries, and one of them was Vietnam. And Vietnam, how they did it is that they combined Hmong traditional music into a physics class. So this was for grade 7 students in physics. And the teacher wanted to focus on the source of sound as a topic of the course. So these are the big terms in physics: oscillation, sound waves, etc. So the teacher taught it through gongs by using active participatory learning. The teacher used a mixed combination of methodologies and pedagogies. First, the teacher showed some video clips of this music. And then the teacher designed like basic experiment with hands-on by using elastic bands to observe vibration when they pull the string and let go. And then they invited community members who play gong into the class to demonstrate and to listen about different sound waves, about different oscillation that this produces. So this is an example of how the class could take place through this combination or integration. I will not go into details of all of these, but I just put them, as reference for teachers who want to see about this. And this one as well, just one word. You can look at the slides by yourself later, but the word is that collaboration between teacher and then between the different advisors from museums. So you don't have to work alone when you do this kind of lesson plan development or activity development. You can invite various stakeholders to participate and to support you. Okay, so with this, Vanessa, do I hand it back to you or wait, yeah. It's still my part, right? So the benefits. So what are the benefits of using this approach of using living heritage in school? The recipients of the benefits could be the students, the teachers, and then of course the community. We're looking at the big picture. The students get to have new knowledge and fun in a fun way. And teachers also feel more alive and more rewarded when the students are enthusiastic in the class and they become more effective in delivering the contents and the knowledge and skills. And of course, the community and living heritage also benefit from it, from this interrelationship and also, support for safeguarding. Let me just leave you with this slide here. So there's this connectedness. You get to safeguard the living heritage. In this learning approach is contextualized, meaning that it's not separated from one item or one set of competency or area of skills and knowledge, but everything is combined together. It's fun. Usually it's very fun and hands-on rather than just doing the lab or just doing the textbook or the lecture-based. So it also promotes in terms of cultural, pluralism. It also enhances inclusion because different students and teachers get to be connected to other kind of living heritage that, represent each diversity in the class and also in the community. So all of these in the end provide better education. It also supports sustainable development beyond the classroom. And also it helps promote the global citizenship of understanding first your own role and your own culture, expanding it to the regional and expanding it to the global for more understanding. Okay, so here we have the questions. about your examples of living heritage. How would you use it? And what benefits do you see about using living heritage in schools?
As we are a bit late already on the schedule, maybe we can watch the video of the example that took place in Korea, and you can at the same time maybe think of examples and have maybe quick sharing after the video, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I'll play the video right now.
Thank you, Dana.
제가 수업했던 곳은 용인의 신갈초등학교인데 수업을 설명하기 전 이곳의 지리적 환경에 대해 약간의 언급이 필요할 것 같습니다. 학교가 위치하는 곳은 구도심이고 신도심과의 환경 차이를 갖고 있으며 다양한 경제적 층위의 가정이 위치한 곳입니다. 학생들 역시 환경에 따라서 사용하는 언어, 활용할 수 있는 디지털 기기, 생활 환경에서 차이를 보이고 있으며 이는 학생들의 배경지식에 많은 영향을 주고 있습니다. 수업 후에 참고로 학생들은 이 수업을 대단히 흥미로워했고 카메라로 수업을 촬영하는 동안 긴장해서 보다 활발히 발표하지 못했다는 이야기들을 많이 했습니다. 수업 촬영이 끝난 후에도 교사에게 자신의 의견을 다양한 글로 써서 보여주는 학생들도 있었습니다. 또한 남사학놀이와 같은 과거의 문화에 관심을 보이면서 관련 역사에 대한 정보를 찾아보는 학생도 있었습니다. 무엇보다 인권 신장을 위한 노력은 누구나 할 수 있고 참여하는 만큼의 발전할 수 있다는 생각을 미약하게나마 이해한 것 같아 수업의 보람을 느꼈습니다. 앞서 말했듯이 우리나라는 현장에서 국가가 발행하는 국정교과서가 현재도 어느 정도의 권위를 갖고 있습니다. 제가 수업한 과목은 사회이며 이 과목의 교과서는 여전히 국가에서 발행합니다. 때문에 저 역시 국정교과서로 수업을 했습니다. 물론 국정교과서는 많은 전문가들이 노력해서 만들기 때문에 신뢰도가 매우 높은 교재이긴 하지만 한국의 모든 학생들이 같은 내용을 같은 방법으로 배울 필요는 없다고 생각하며 내용의 폭과 깊이, 이 방법은 학습자의 수준에 따라 언제든 적절히 변화해야 하며 이것이 교사가 할 역할이라고 생각합니다. 제가 실행하는 수업의 성취 기준은 인권의 중요성 인식과 발전 과정을 통해 인권 보호를 위한 태도를 내면화하는 것입니다. 정확한 표현을 빌리자면 인권의 중요성을 인식하고 인권 신장을 위해 노력했던 옛사람들의 활동을 탐구한다라는 것과 생활 속에서 인권 보장이 필요한 사례를 탐구하여 인권의 중요성을 인식하고 인권 보호를 실천하는 태도를 기른다입니다. 저는 이 부분을 교과서를 통해 수업하려는데 교과서에는 고전 문학의 한 부분과 과거의 사례, 그리고 인권 분야 위인들의 업적을 중심으로 설명을 했습니다. 이것은 나름대로 효율적인 방법이긴 하지만 학생들에게 인권의 발전이 몇 명의 중요한 사람들에게 발전된 것이라는 인상을 줄 수 있을지도 모른다는 그런 걱정을 하게 됐습니다. 또한 옛사람들이 신분사회를 살아가며 느꼈던 불합리함이 어느 순간 그 사회의 임계점을 넘어서 사회 전반의 여론이 되어 나타나는 과정, 그 자체가 인권의 개념 발달이라는 것을 학생들이 생각할 수 있도록 수업을 하고 싶었습니다. 그러나 앞서 말했듯이 너무 어려울 경우 수업 자체를 받아들이지 못하고 그런 학생들이 이제 있을 수 있기 때문에 추상적인 개념 학습은 학생들의 주의 집중을 또 길게 가져가기 힘들기 때문에 사실을 나누고 프로젝트를 구성하는 방법으로 접근했습니다. 다만 학생들의 흥미를 유지시킬 만한 수업 소재를 생각하는 일이 가장 힘들었는데 다행히 유네스코와의 협업을 하며 소개받은 많은 무형문화유산 자료를 접하고 수업 소재에 대한 생각을 확장할 수 있었습니다. 학생들의 흥미를 유지하면서 1년의 교육 경험을 학생들에게 제공했다는 점이 가장 좋았습니다. 흥미 중심의 신체활동, 표현활동을 실시하고 이를 바탕으로 무형유산에 담겨있는 생각들을 알아보고 그리고 이를 학생들이 살아가는 현대 학생생활에 적용해보는 과정 모두 교사와 학생에게 흥미로웠습니다. 또한 무형유산 속에 담긴 의미를 알아보기 위해 학생들이 친숙한 소재에서 의미를 찾는 작업을 해보고 이를 무형유산 속에 적용해보는 탐구 방법 역시 흥미로웠습니다. 현대가요 속에서 사회 비판의 요소를 찾고 과거의 가수들인 남사당패의 공연 대본에서 당시 사회 비판적 요소를 찾아봤던 작업은 학생들에게 사회와 문화에 대한 다른 시각을 제공했다는 점에서 좋은 시도였다고 생각합니다.
So I hope that you found this testimony interesting. This is a project that took place a couple of years ago. I should have introduced it. It was done with some performing arts, Namsadang Nori. And as the professor here, the teacher here is explaining, this Namsadang Nori performing arts, which includes acrobatics and a lot of other techniques, including theater, was used in many classes, including to explain these complex topics of human rights. And this was done with primary students, like higher primary students. So it's quite an achievement to explain this concept to students. But they were able to integrate this idea of human rights even in the contemporary context and do comparison between the role of these street artists in the past. They were the social media basically of the time, and nowadays. So to come back to our discussion, I'd like to see first if you have some questions about the first presentation on living heritage, and what is your first reaction about this idea of bringing living heritage to school? Do you see that as something positive? I hope so, otherwise you would not maybe be here for 3 hours. You would not waste your time. But if you can tell us what you expect from that, either in the Q&A box or orally. So I do not see any hands. Not sure if it's because interpretation is a little bit behind or if it's because everything is crystal clear. Okay, anyway, we can always come back to that if you have questions.
Somebody
later.
raised their hand.
Someone, oh yes, okay, Jessica Cole. Yes? Would you like?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes, thank you.
Okay, right, thank you. So just to introduce myself, I am from Singapore, and I am very interested in the idea of intangible cultural heritage, which is why I'm here. And I just had a question. I hope it's not overly basic, but in Singapore, because earlier we were talking about introducing intangible cultural heritage in schools. And in Singapore, I think one thing that has been sort of a topic of contention is this idea of Singlish, which in schools, we officially learn English, but because we're quite a multicultural society, so, you know, day to day, we speak this kind of amalgamation of English, Mandarin, Malay, and some dialects, Singlish, which in the past, the government has sort of criticized and said, well, we shouldn't be speaking Singlish and more focused on English. And I wonder if, you know, this is something that can be considered intangible cultural heritage. Sorry, I hope my question made sense.
Yes, it makes total sense, of course. And it's not as simple as you think to answer this kind of question, because we are talking about oral expressions as part of what is living heritage, as Nina mentioned earlier. On the other hand, under the convention, strictly speaking, language, the passing of language is not really considered as living heritage, but of course it is a vehicle to convey a lot of information. It is a vehicle to convey the history, the culture, the contemporary values, etc. So I think if we want to simplify a little bit, the answer is that it belongs to the Singapore community to identify themselves with a vehicle of communication or another. And if the community feels comfortable with Singlish because they consider that the mix of language that you mentioned, the different roots that are brought into the language is what reflects how they feel and how they want to communicate, then therefore it is part of their intangible heritage, of their living heritage. It's not the question that we as external people have to say yes or no. And stricto sensus, it's not even to the government to say what is part of the identity of people. Now, there can be an official language in, I don't know, official documentations or in the curriculum, in the curricular books in schools. This is a decision to be made. But what the community speaks is their choice, basically, should be their choice. And in that part would be living heritage. So I'm not sure, Nina, would you agree with what I say? Or
yeah, I think there are basically like two sub questions here. Like number one, would Singlish be considered as a living heritage or not? And then the answer is yes. It depends. Even though the convention says that, languages are a vehicle to, living heritage, but in many countries around the world, we acknowledge that, languages are actually very important and they're disappearing very fast. So breaking down into domains and definitions of what is or is not is actually in the hands of each, country or each community. But the trickier question is that when we talk about a country, there's like the government, there's like the local people, they're like the educators, like, so who defines who has the most say in it? So I think it's about negotiation of power and also bringing people to the common ground to understanding what it is. But I agree with Vanessa that, it's really up to the people, to the community, what is or what is not considered as living heritage. And Singlish, yes, it is about, a combination of reflecting the diversity that makes Singapore in the first place too. So I think basically I agree with Vanessa, and I also I'm rooting for you to work on this point as well. Oh,
Thank you.
another point in Thailand, in a separate project, in the northern part, there's also some kind of language that is disappearing. So a school actually uses it and defines it as a living heritage, and then makes a course around that on how the young can connect back to the elders and to practice that language through writing, and through also speaking and learning, and also etc.
We actually have two more questions in the Q&A, one that you can already answer straight away.
Yes.
And the other one is in Chinese. So maybe either we can ask one of the Chinese interpreter to type it in English so our facilitator can pick it up after answering the English question now. Would that be okay?
So the question is, what are your suggestions on avoiding cultural appropriation when teaching about intangible heritage? This is a very interesting question, and it's not a simple one either.
Very good question.
Maybe we can try to define simply what is cultural appropriation, which is basically it's when some cultural. Basically, it's all about decontextualization. It's about taking an element and bringing it out of the normal way it is practiced, and someone else who is probably not from that community is trying to make it his own. I'm not sure how to explain that simply, but basically it's decontextualizing. And everything that deals with decontextualizing, I would say that there's no simple answer. It's complex. And again, it's about negotiation. But by working, as we briefly hinted earlier, by working with partners, with community people who are practicing this heritage, this is the best way to really understand in depth what the element is about, what the living heritage is about, what is important in it, what the community wants to preserve, and therefore to transmit this value together with the lesson in the school. And I think we will see a little bit more of that when we talk about the different steps.
And I hear your point, because cultural appropriation in this term could be interpreted like you're teaching someone about other people's culture. So like Vanessa said, it's important to bring in the community engagement. But then second point, many teachers that I have worked with, they're also very hesitant about this, like, oh, what do we do? Because it might seem that we are actually, copycat or pretending to be from that culture. So as a teacher, you can actually step back and use your role again as a facilitator to facilitate, recognizing different cultures and different ICH. And by using inclusive approach, inviting community members, representatives, or even asking the students who, represent or identify themselves with that cultural group to participate. So this will shift from the misconception of doing cultural appropriation to instead being a cultural broker. You're actually facilitating, you're bridging the gap, and you're connecting different cultural groups together to learn about ICH. In the end, through this diversity, you can bring the theme out to ask them to critically think further. What are the commonality among different groups of people in here? So that I think the students will understand very well, and other people too, that your good intention.
The Chinese question, maybe we will wait to answer it because some elements are similar to what we have answered now, and some will come clearer later. Otherwise, we will go ahead of the.
There's one last question in the in the chat that our Chinese translator has been putting.
And I think we will get to that because otherwise some of the elements are here, and I think we will discuss and answer that at the end. I think it will become clearer. Otherwise, we will do a summary of the MOOC before we actually of the webinar before we do the webinar. But it's we will not forget that it's an important question. Okay, so if it's fine, thank you for your questions so far, and let's
we also have another hand there.
Another hand, yes. Okay, let's take this one last.
Yeah, I just allowed to talk.
Hello.
So yeah, please. Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, I'm from Wuhan University, China, and thank you for the speech. And you have just presented a project in Vietnam before, and I'm wondering where can I find a detailed report on the project? For example, describing how the project worked, how the pilot school was selected, and how the various partners and personnel were organized so that the program can be better studied and replicated around the world. And for the second question, how can we assess the effectiveness of the project at the end of the project? For example, whether the students' cultural awareness has increased, and whether any quantitative method were used. And that's all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first one, we will send you a link to the project information, like on website. Is very very comprehensive. The second one, how to measure impacts, that is in our step 6, right, Vanessa? Step 5, step 6.
Partly, yes. Yes.
Yeah, so we can, if you don't mind, we will remember this question, and then after we share some examples and case, then we can see if more information we can provide you at that step. But thank you for your question.
Okay, so I will share my screen, and we will start looking into the practicalities of what to do and how to do it, actually. So, do you see my screen?
Yes.
And not all the chat boxes on the side?
Yes,
okay.
We only see your screen.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's go, into these steps that we propose. So first of all, a word of caution. We are presenting you a structured way of going through this project. It doesn't mean that you have to follow us blindly. You may think that some of the steps or some of the sub-steps are not necessarily essential, or they are not suited to your context. Feel free to play around with this method. We have tried our best to compile the lessons and learn from many experiences, but of course it can always be that context is different and you want to do things differently. But here is our suggestion based on experience so far. And I think it's quite important to remember, to try to keep always in the back of the mind, what are the objectives of this kind of projects. When we make this effort, because it is an effort to start developing lessons about ICH and to bring these new lessons alive, there are two really big objectives. One is because we are interested in our culture, in our identity, and we want to preserve our living heritage, or we want to preserve living heritage in general, not necessarily ours, but in general. And because we believe that it's important to provide education of high quality. And studies shows that quality comes with relevance. And when you talk to someone, in this case, a student, about something he knows already because it's related to his or her own culture, then suddenly it becomes more relevant. It's not the only way to create relevance, but it is one way. So we have identified 6 main steps. You can see an overview here, but let's go through the first one, which is understanding your context, understanding the context in which you work. And the first thing is to try to understand what living heritage is around you. If you build a new lesson, you will need to have some knowledge, some content to develop your lesson around it, to see how you create the different activities in your class. And so it's important to know what is around you. And there are various types of ICH that you can use. One is documented ICH. By documented, we mean that articles, books, audiovisual materials are already available because they are in local or national inventories, because you will find them on various platforms, the UNESCO platform, for instance, the lists of the 2003 convention, or because many research institutes like ICHCAP here has a lot of publications and newsletters, etc. And it can also be your local or national associations who are publishing information about something. The benefit of using this kind of ICH is that you will have already materials that is prepared. People have done research for you, so you save time. And this brings me already to the question about the Beijing Opera versus the Xinjiang Opera. Because in this case, Beijing Opera, for instance, may have been documented. And if it is documented, the teacher can quickly grab information from there to see how it can be integrated in the lesson. So it's still learning about ICH, it can still enrich a lesson. It's not necessarily the living heritage of the people in the classroom, but it is part of understanding in general about the importance of culture. Then there is living heritage that is related to the school location in a broad term, which can mean the knowledge, the practice, the value of the students, the families around the school, or you as a teacher, you also have your own living heritage. Your colleagues have some knowledge and values, and all this can be brought in. So the benefits of that is that it's much more contextualized, it's very local, and you have your personal value and knowledge, which is very important for living heritage. But then you need to do a little bit more preparatory work. And these two elements are not necessarily disconnected because, as Nina mentioned, you can always make comparison and discussion between different elements. So the Beijing Opera versus the Xinjiang Opera. You can always start from one element and then ask people around to discuss how they feel about a similar element. If you want to identify like how to choose, because there is so much around you, you can discuss with the students what they know, what they do in their family. You can do mapping exercise with the teachers or with the students to walk around and do research. You can talk to cultural institutions who can become partner, and you will have already an idea of what is happening in your environment, what kind of material is available. And you can vote, for instance, you can ask students to vote for what they would be most interested in. And that's a way, for instance, to limit and to select among the broad diversity of elements around you. And then once you know that, what kind of activities will you do? This is very broad. We have had various type of activities. Some are in the lesson, like curricular lessons, as we have seen. You take the objective of the lesson and you just twist the activity. You can have school projects, you can have special days, the day of environment, where you talk about ways that people preserve environment, like the local knowledge about preserving the environment. You can have special clubs, can be dance clubs or any type of clubs. What is a few tips, like it's useful to plan early from the beginning of the year to see where you will slot this special activity. If you're, for instance, connecting to a festival, it's good to have activities maybe just before the festival so that the students will understand it better when the festival happens and they can benefit from the participation better. Don't be over ambitious. You can start with one example or two examples, and then if you feel comfortable, you can expand and work not alone, work with colleagues, with parents, with the students. You still have to respect, of course, their busy time. During a festival, they may not be available for you to come to school because they are busy with the festival itself, but they can come before or after, for instance. So as time is running short, maybe we will skip this poll and just go through that. The partners, so this is something very important. The burden should not be on the teacher's shoulder only. There are many partners who can work together to make these projects happen. Partners in the school, colleagues from your department. You can work together on programs related to language, for instance. You can work with colleagues from different departments to look at various aspects of living heritage, like Nina was talking earlier about music and coconut. You can have the biology teacher talking about coconut growing tree, and the music teacher talking about the music made by the instrument. Can be the school management who would help with maybe the logistic, the planning, the authorization, some ideas also, some partnerships outside the school. The partners in the communities, first of all, your students, because they will be present, so you're sure that they will participate. And we have had many examples where the students are actually sharing their own practice with their schoolmates, students' family, and community practitioners who are often willing to share to transmit their skills and their knowledge, and and school can be one of this avenue to do that. And then cultural and non-cultural institutions, federations, cultural institutions, associations, all the UNESCO partner. Here we have the ASP.NET school network, the government organization. We would like to, we will not go into details about that, but it's important to remain aware of ethics when we deal with partners, any type of partners and heritage. It is important to respect all these partners and their knowledge, And there are principles. I think Nina will talk a little bit about that later. What we saw FPIC, free prior informed consent, which means making sure that the partner you're working with is comfortable with what you're with the information they are sharing with you. All this is because it will help build trust, and then your partners will be more willing to share their resource and feel real part of the project, instead of just giving resources. So, for instance, this is a project in Kyrgyzstan, where you can see a list of federations and cultural institutions who were working with schools. And that also goes from, we go through similar list. But community partners were very important because they organized classes like felting classes, for instance. And one school decided to start a small ICH museum in the school where students could go and take classes, and they donated objects for the museum. So really creating this museum was a very interesting experience, because they had to discuss and generate idea of what would go in the museum, how would they be used, how the objects would be used and displayed, and what kind of lessons could be given there. And now it's part of the school. It's a dedicated room, and many activities have taken place there, and the students are feeling much more relaxed when they go into this museum. And you can see like there are lots of carpets and objects in there that are later related to lessons. So having said that, let's see a quick poll, if I manage to launch it. Here it is. No, back. All three, launch. Okay, so now that I have explained a little bit about this first step, what do you think? Why do you think the first step of the methodology is really about spending the time to understand your local context? Is it because it will help you understand what you can do and with who and how? Is it because it will help you evaluate your lesson outcomes better? Or is it because it will help you start designing a lesson plan according to you? Okay, so we have quite a number of people who have answered already. So let's wait until we have 30. We are at 28. Can we have a few more, please? And then, but basically, what we can see already is that a majority of you, a large majority of you, feel that understanding your context will help you understand what you can do with who, when, where. And yes, this is really the basic objective of this step. You spend the time to analyze and to see what will be most relevant, what kind of heritage can you use, and how will you put that in the school context, in which type of activity, who can help you, who can be your partners. Of course, ultimately, in the end, it will help you evaluate your lesson outcome better in the longer term, because maybe you understand better your living heritage. Yes, it will help you start designing a lesson plan because it will give you ideas. Of course, this is not wrong, but really the direct objective is to see what's the most feasible, what is the most suitable approach in a current context. So we will go back to the lesson, to the PowerPoint. Okay. It's sharing, I think. Okay, yes, here we are. Yeah, so at this stage, you have an idea of the ICH, of the living heritage around you. You have an idea of who can be your partners. You have an idea of if you think it's better to work in an extracurricular context or curricular context or in a proper lesson. So you have this idea. So concretely, how do you connect a living heritage element with this school activity? And for that, there are various entry points. You can start with your list of living heritage. You can start with the program of your subject, your curriculum activities, or the list of clubs that exist in your school. You can also start with a theme. For instance, your school may have a priority on global citizenship or on social education for sustainable development or peace education. So you could start with that and see how this can be enriched by some of the local practice. And you can start from students' needs or students' interest, I would say is more important. So, but let's look at one option. Let's say that you will select a living heritage first. So you realize, you identify that in your community, for instance, you have a specific festival, or there is a special way to celebrate when the students are reaching the age of 15 or 16. Or there is a very special type of music, for instance. So you can try to really understand how this element is practiced, what are the values, what are the different components of it, what kind of materials are used if you produce a music instrument, for instance, what raw materials are used, or if you build a house, if you're into architecture. And after that, you see how this component can match with various subjects. So again, to go back to the example of the coconut, because it was a very good one, then yes, people play this specific music instrument. And so you are yourself a music teacher. That's why you were interested in this music instrument. And so you can use a lesson, you can develop a lesson about this music instrument and teaching the students how to try to play it. But you can also connect with your colleague from biology and ask them if they are interested to teach the students about this coconut growing, or to teach about, I don't know, the leather that is used for the strings and the type of animals and how they are raised. And you can maybe also work with the physics teacher about the sound and the pitch, for instance. So you can approach different colleagues. So this was the case in Korea, for instance. They had a lantern festival, which is very famous in this area. And so this was a primary lesson. So it was only one teacher, but using different components, different subjects. So the students were learning about the history of this festival. They were like in these lanterns, you have to write little messages for like little wishes to your neighbors. So they were practicing writing and trying to think, developing empathy by thinking of what people in the past would have been writing and what they would write themselves. They were working on the shape of lanterns. They were making lanterns, so they could design them and in the class. And they would speak with their families and do research to compare how this festival was celebrated in the past and nowadays. So there is an historical dimension. and social study dimension. And they had a fun activity with the Lantern Festival in the school. But if you are yourself a math teacher or literature teacher or history teacher or an art teacher, you can start by looking at your curriculum and trying to analyze the various learning objectives in your lessons and see if different living heritage could fit in your curriculum objectives. So for instance, this is a mathematics professor in Nepal, and she had lessons on sets, which are like groups of objects, and then you identify what is common to different groups, like what is overlapping elements and different components. And it can be a little bit complex to explain. And at that stage in her life, there was a celebration in her family, a Janku ceremony, where you invite the whole family. And so in this class, she organized a fake Janku ceremony, but just to show the students how it was practiced, how people pay respect to special members of the family who reach a certain age. And you do offerings with different foods. And then they were playing with sets by looking at the different offerings and the different groups of food stuff and the different group of people and those who had overlaps or not. So this was a very practical way to use these math concepts, but through an actual ceremony that the students practice in the classroom. Now it's important to keep in mind a few things. What are the resources you will need, the space, the transportation, because you can imagine very interesting lesson. But of course, you need to have the resources for that. You need to keep in mind the school policies. In some schools, you cannot invite external people, for instance. So you cannot say, I will invite a master musician or a master carver, like here you see. Or you cannot go on field trips because you do not have transportations or the policy doesn't allow it. So of course, you cannot include that in your program. So it's important to have this first thinking to do a feasibility check. But then at that stage, you should have an idea of what kind of living heritage, you will use in which type of activity and lesson. Which brings us to step 3, which is to learn more about the selected element.
Thank you, Vanessa.
I think we have to go a bit faster.
Okay, faster? All right. I'm just concerned because other webinars that I have done with interpreters, I'm a very fast speaker, right? So in the end, always like, please, Lenina, please be very slow. But okay, so I'm going to just improvise by cutting off some parts that have already been discussed and maybe focus more on what we haven't really talked about. So now connecting to step 3 to learn more about the selected living heritage. So why don't we go with the poll first? Because when we talk about how to select and what kind of information about living heritage, like teach about what, like what story, what point. Now, usually teachers will all, some of them think that we have to be the one doing the research. But our question that Vanessa and I have thought about is, what about the question of asking the students to do the poll themselves? And not the poll, to do the research themselves. So these, let's take a look. What are the benefits of including research as a student's assignment in your lesson or activity plan? So you can select many answers. So asking the students to be the co-researchers about this living heritage. Is it good? Is it a good idea? If yes, why? So we have seen some answers here. And many of them say that the last point, C, students will have the opportunity to engage, right, in meaningful experiences with the community, with the family, because through this research, they have to ask, they have to interview, they have to understand. And also The A, students will learn how to find knowledgeable people in their communities. So that linking them back to the resource persons. And that has multi-benefits. For the student side, they get real good information and new perspectives directly from the practitioners. But from the practitioner's point of view, they get recognition. So their knowledge is being transmitted on to the students. B, yes, that's right. Students will collect the information, so you will not need to prepare any content yourself and save time. Well, I'm surprised that it's also a popular answer, Vanessa. But yeah, why not? Maybe some teachers like, yeah, let the students do the work. But I don't know how to respond to this. But yeah, you can save the time. But at the same time, you can use that time instead to be the facilitator, to lead and guide the students. But probably this is not the main reason why we want student engagement. So let me go to the next slide, please, Vanessa. Okay, next slide. So now after we force our students to do the research, just kidding, after we encourage the students to be co-researcher, now the question is, what information should we collect? So just remember the 5 W's and 1 H: what, who, when, why, where, and then 1 H, how. So basically just start with these questions to help you guide you through. So you have the slides here, so you can look at the slides in detail as I'm trying to manage the time. But what is basically the name, the description? What is this living heritage? And when we talk about what, don't forget that there are many objects related to it. Also the place, the location, the materials. Many living heritage cannot happen without these tangible, these objects, these things. Who is about the community, right? But the trick is, we always think about the ecosystem, the big picture of living heritage. Yes, there are practitioners, there are people who weave textiles, there are people who practice, certain rituals. There are people who do this and that. But don't forget about people who could be the supporters of this living heritage. For example, for performing art, for let's say a dance, a traditional dance or contemporary dance even, there has to be audience, right? So information that you can collect also is about who would be the audience of this performance. And then when, how is it practiced? How often is it practiced? When is it specifically in certain month only for religious purposes, or according to some kind of calendar, or it's more about occasion? For example, someone gets married and then this tradition is practiced. Where? It's both about the physical place and also the spiritual or social place. How? How is it practiced and how is it passed on? We have to focus on two things, because practice is being practiced, but do the people of this generation who practice it also share it and teach it and pass it on, or influence, the values and meanings to the younger generation? So you have to look at both practice and transmission. And this is something that you cannot neglect at all. I have seen that many some of the teachers that I have worked with in the past, they completely forget this one. They forgot this. So they talk about Wikipedia style, like this tradition or this craft needs tools 1 to 10. The step is cut paper and do and this, who cut it and then done. But they don't talk about why. What is the meaning and value and social function of that living heritage? Why do people cut that paper? Why do they do it? What is it for? Why do they do it in the shape of certain kind of animals or plants or sun or ocean? What is the story, the feeling, the spiritual meaning inside? And when we talk about values, it can also include social value, bringing people together. We're all as one under this ceremony. It can also be economic value. We're not neglecting the fact that it can also promote livelihood and help people sustain a good life through earning money. Or it can be purely about spiritual. It's nothing about money. They would not sell it. They would not think about tourism or anything. It's more about their heart. Or is it about historical value, etc.? Okay. Now, next one, please. So you have the what, when, who, how, why, and then the next one, how. How do we collect this information? Now we know the topics, right? Like the big topics, but how? So basically, there are many kind of methods. We can do the primary data collection, meaning that you go into the field, you talk to the people directly, you talk to the community, the practitioners directly, and you gather that information. You can also participate in that living heritage. You cook the food yourself with them, with the community. You go to that ceremony and festival so you can observe and participate. Or you can use desk research by doing, searching online or looking at other publications or studies done by other people. So it's not wrong to use, a combination of different methods that would be most practical and suitable in your context. And again, you have various partners that you can work with, like museums. You don't have to start from zero. You can talk to the museums. You can talk to the community and other teachers. Next one, please. Okay, now let's talk about when we know how already, but most important thing is that when we work with living heritage, we work with people. And when we work with people, often they're both the very strong community representatives, and at the same time there are those fragile group, like marginalized group, ethnic group. So we have to make sure that when we work in gathering the information, we have to be ethical, we have to be respectful of them. So I'm just going to focus on some of the points here. So when we talk about FPIC, the last word here, FPIC, this is a short abbreviation or acronym for free, prior, informed consent. So free consent, meaning that when you ask them, like, can I take your picture? Can I interview you? Can I participate in your living heritage? Can we invite you to our school to work on developing the curriculum or study? You ask them first. You ask them without giving them pressure. You give them time and freedom to decide. So you don't use influence. Like, if you don't participate, I will tell my principal, I will tell my governor that you refuse. That is using mafia style of consent, right? So we're not doing that. We have to give them free consent. We have to get free consent. Prior, so you don't take the pictures, you don't record them, you don't take video, you don't already share their information that they give you to the public without getting the consent from them first. So you have to get it prior, before you do all of this stuff. Informed consent. So you don't pressure them. You ask them for consent first, but then you don't tell them your agenda or your objective or your purpose of what information, of how you will use their information. So this is kind of deceiving them or giving them incomplete picture. So you have to make sure that they will make informed consent. They will give permission when they understand the whole picture of why you're here. Okay, and then the rest basically is all the basic ethical practices of number one, making sure that you're not using your bias to influence the information or interpretation of the data from the community, and you don't misinterpret it. You are also transparent by introducing who you are, where you're from. If you arrange a field trip with the students, you have to also introduce that these are the students and they're going to do this and they're going to be here, and your information collected, can we publish it on our online platforms on site, make a video, etc. So you have to be follow these ethical practices. Now, answering some of the question previously, from Tian Cheng Ray. So you talk about a risk that you're bringing Chinese acupuncture and moxibustion into as an intangible to the community, college, etc. But what about if there are certain risks associated as a medical technology? What do we do in this regard? So I will answer the question by saying, number one, when we talk about living heritage, we watch two things. Number one, is it against human rights? Is it like violating someone, hurting someone? Is it sustainable? Is it supporting sustainable development? And when you look at the word sustainable development, health is one of it. So let's say if there's some kind of traditional medicine that might give, health risk instead, then as a teacher, you can encourage your students and yourself to talk to the community, to the practitioners on how to reflect on this part. Because when we open up, questions, there will be some questions that we will act as a mirror to reflect back to them, to re-examine, to rethink about certain parts that are not, in line with human rights or not in line with sustainable development or good health, even if there's some danger. Just like Vanessa said, living heritage can evolve and change to make it better and better for the people, right? We don't have to conserve it to be the same. Our world today has changed so much compared to the ancient time in terms of slavery, for example. So we can change. We can always change for the better. So with that, it means that we have to create an open and safe place for students, for the community, for parents, for all of us to have a good discussion that is based on trust, that this is towards a common goal, which is to make our world, to make our ICH, to make our place a better and happier place. So with this, there's some similar cases that maybe I can share with you later, but I'm just watching the time here. But there are examples. You want to look at the case studies. There's some rituals in Thailand that are kind of dangerous because it's about rite of passage. A young boy will become a young man through this ceremony, but it includes some kind of small body torture. So the community come back and talk to themselves, like, do we need to keep this? Can we use symbolism, like symbolic, to replace the actual hitting or something like that instead? So with this, we can open up, examine together through collective efforts. Okay. Yeah. Next one, please. Okay, so I will just summarize this quote from a principal that sometimes the students, they even though they represent and they come from certain ethnic community or ethnic background, but maybe they have been so disconnected from their roots, right? Maybe they move into the town or something like that, and they don't know where to start. If you ask them, like, now, come identify your living heritage. This principle use a method of by using the support of online resources. Like, you can Google first, you can do online research. And then when you come back with a list, then you can further explore that. So that really motivates them. And then they can talk to their communities because now they have starting points and ideas from this online support or online research. Next one, please. Now I will talk about the case study in Thailand. This is for grades 1 to 6 in Chiang Mai province, Ban Mae Ngon Khilek. So they did a study, the teacher, on how to select the living heritage, right? Like, what living heritage should I use and teach in my class? So the teachers arranged a mini assignment for the students to walk around in their own neighborhood and just observe, like, what pops out when you walk around. And many students say, like, since we were born, we saw this kind of bamboo weaving in front of our house and other on our neighbors too. We wonder what it is. So that's how the methodology of the teacher is to use curiosity and student participation by they being the one selecting what living heritage. So next one, please. So after that, they observed that, all the villages, all the houses, they have this taleo, the bamboo talisman. So, but then different ethnicities have different shapes and forms, and they have some variations. So the teacher used this as the assignment for students to study, to talk to their parents, and to talk to their neighbors on what is this? Very simple question, like, how do you do it and what is it for? So they found out, next one. So they found out that this is actually like a lucky charm that will prevent them from bad spirits and also prevent them from COVID-19. And then they learn how to weave this together with the seniors, the intellects in the village. Next one. Okay, and these are the teachers. And because there's so many grades, they have to use different levels of assignments, like difficulty. It cannot be same level. Next one, please. So I just want to show you a quick map of this one living heritage. The teacher was able to connect to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 competencies and subjects by number one, language. What is a history? Math. What is the shapes and forms? PE, they have to do bodily movement. Social science. What is the religious belief of making this talisman? Art, they have to make drawing. Science, they have to use bamboo, and it's certain kind of bamboo and species of bamboo only. So they have to study that bamboo, where it grows, where they can find it in the forest. They also use vocational training because you know what, these fourth grade students, after they learn how to make the Talao talisman, they can sell it for 2 baht each piece. So they now have their pocket money and savings. And then teacher also use basic English and Chinese word of vocabulary related to Talao. This is how to show off how multidisciplinary approach of doing the Talao study. Next one. Okay, so that wraps up step 3 of how to learn more and how to select and how to gather information about living heritage. Thank you, and back to Vanessa.
Yeah, so at this stage, we know what exists in our context. Let's recap. We have connected some living heritage with some of our subjects. And with the living heritage we selected, we have a lot of information. So how do we transfer this information, this knowledge, into lesson activity? So we will look at this lesson at step 4, but maybe we take a very, very brief break to stretch, get a drink, like just a few minutes for you. And also you can think of additional questions, and we get back in like 5 minutes maximum. Is that okay? So let's do that. Okay, so should we resume? Are you back? Yes. Okay. And we have also Han and Tana are here.
Yes, I think
Yes,
yeah,
we are here,
already.
Okay, so I hope our participants are here too, because of course you are the most important. I didn't see any new question appearing so far. So let's move on with the step 4, which is how to design the lesson plan and to teach per se. When you want to integrate this living heritage in your activities. So I'm talking about lessons here, but of course it can be extracurricular activities, it can be projects, it can be events, as we say, but some of the content will be similar, of course. And the important part, I mean, of course, your teachers, you know that when you start with your lesson, you identify what are the goals, what are the objectives that you're trying to achieve with a specific lesson or activities. So you may use different type of scales and standards to do that. Whatever you use, it's fine. But what we would like you to keep in mind is that if you make the effort of bringing living heritage into your content, then it would be important to reflect that in the lesson goals and objectives directly, because it will help with the evaluation. It will help with also reminding you about this specific objective and this effort, and it will keep you on track. So what are the students expected to know at the end of the lesson about math, about physics, about literature, about sport, but also about living heritage? Are you presenting certain content? Do you want to have them to understand specific values, specific steps that are used in the practice, for instance? Does this lesson create awareness about living heritage? Look, and you include some questions about that. And some ways of evaluating if your students at the end are more familiar with living heritage, or more interested, or more aware that it's important to safeguard it. And for yourself, how does ICH add value to the pedagogical activities? So we will see some concrete examples later. When you develop your lesson, and you make this effort of bringing living heritage in the lesson, it doesn't mean that this living heritage has to be everywhere. This again is free. The idea is to enrich a lesson that maybe, or an activity. So it can be a very small component at the beginning of the lesson, just to awake the students' interest about something specifically. So, for instance, you are going to talk about I'm not sure, a music style, and you start by playing something related to this music, and then you go on with your lesson, and you can show the traditional instruments that is there. And you continue with teaching the history of that musical period, for instance. So it may just appear at the very beginning. Or it can be a major component of the lesson. Like we were looking at the taleo before, for instance, this bamboo talisman. And you can do, there were like some mathematical lessons, if I remember correctly, where they were looking at symmetry with the bamboo weaving. And of course, they can use the example of the bamboo weaving, or of embroidery or tapestry or other craft element to do the symmetrical lines, for instance, to draw the symmetrical line, or understand other geometric concepts and angles, for instance. So at that stage, you use ICH really as a major component of the lesson. It's really part of it. And you can use many components as you would use in your other lessons. Some of them if possible, related to explaining about this living heritage. And it can be games, it can be discussion, you can have demonstrations, so you can have videos of people performing, like being part of a festival, for instance. You can start with this video and then talk about the festival later. You can invite community members to talk about their practice and do demonstration and give lecture. And of course, we encourage a lot of active work, active pedagogies, group in work, group in pair. And as Nina mentioned earlier, it's quite important that students will be allowed to discuss and share their opinions. Because even if living heritage is practiced in one community, different families may practice it differently. So they may want to be able to talk about their personal experience, their personal feelings, their personal ways of doing that. So it's quite important to give way to leave space for this exchange in this case. And so that throughout the lessons, the students will become more aware of the meaning, the value, and how it is practiced. So let's look at a specific lesson, which was done in Kazakhstan on the art of genealogy. So this is in Kazakhstan, they have this oral tradition of being able to talk about the ancestors of their ancestors of their ancestors, like their forefathers, and they know the list over many, many generations. This is important for them because it allows them to trace their history and also to avoid intermarriage between generations that are too close to each other. So in this lesson, it was based in the literature class, and the students were doing research. They were drawing their genealogical tree, and they were presenting their genealogical tree to other students. And so, for instance, here, the way the learning objectives were defined was that the students had to determine the formation of the cultural and genetic code of the Kazakh people. So they were using their family genealogy to explain which clans they were and to which group they belonged. And so, as you can see, this is a learning objective that is directly connected to living heritage, and it was done through research. Then they were also, as part of their learning objective, learning new words and terminology related to genealogy, for instance. And this kind of objective can be a common learning objective in language lesson. It's not necessarily connected to living heritage. So you see that not everything has to be about living heritage. They were practicing research and presentation skills. Again, this is a quite generic learning objective. And then we go into attitude, and this particular lesson or project helped them develop a sense of belonging to a certain community through the knowledge of their tribe and strengthen intergenerational connection. So by measuring that at the end of the lesson and by keeping that as an objective, the teacher was able to measure the students' awareness about their living heritage. So the first objective was more technical. They were learning about the living heritage, and the last objective was really to learn about their attitude toward living heritage and the importance of safeguarding it. Then, as a teacher, you are usually providing pedagogical materials. They can be hands out, they can be posters, they can be PowerPoint presentations or audiovisual materials that you will display. And of course, in addition to the technical aspects of your subject lesson, it's useful to also bring resources on ICH. And here it's about finding a balance between what is informative. So you want them to understand enough, to have enough content about the ICH, but not too overwhelming. Because if you go a 2-hour lecture about a special tapestry weaving, they may lose interest because it's just too long. So it's important to understand the value, to understand the meaning, but in a way that is that can be digested by them. So we really encourage you to make this aspect as dynamic as possible, with a lot of photo, drawings, interviews. You can invite people or record interviews and bringing objects and tools if they are related to that. And I like this example of Cambodia. It's a bit small maybe on the screen, but in one page, for instance, they managed to capture the different steps of a mat weaving. It's a mat with grass. And so they have the different steps, they describe the material, and you have the techniques that is described and a little bit of explanation. So in one page, it's quite concise for the students. It's a good way for them to remember, and then they could practice at home with the exercise. Of course, a lot of your lessons will take place in your classroom, and it's a safe environment. It's structured and it's controlled, so it's good. But also it can be quite useful to step outside in the schoolyard. Of course, you can do field trips. These are usually very rich, but they require a lot more logistic and organization. But sometimes just going in the schoolyard is good, for instance, to get the students in a different mood and a different way to receive information. I remember an example in Indonesia where they were studying plants to make cosmetic products, and they were just doing that in the schoolyard, in the garden around the school. So they didn't need to go far, and they were still able to pick plants. About the scheduling, usually if you start integrating new content, it may need a little bit more time than a regular period of a lesson. We have seen some teachers, who were using consecutive periods, and they were grouping their time, rearranging their schedule to be able to have a longer time to work with the students to do, for instance, a hands-on project related to, in Nepal, they were making a ladder, for instance, so they had to group their hours. The teacher was able to do that. Or it can be every week, you give them little assignments and little reflection time in between. And as I mentioned earlier, if there is a celebration or a practice, it's good to organize your lesson close to this celebration so that the students can see it live. And again, think about the resources that are needed and what is feasible and replicable over a year. For instance, if you want to invite someone and you make the effort of designing this lesson and you invite a master musician, maybe this master musician will not be available every year. So it can be a good idea to film this person if they agree, if you get their prior consent, so that the next year, if this person is not available, you can show the movie. And then, of course, once you have prepared your lesson, you want to teach it. You want to make the teaching and learning happen. And it's important to keep in mind that we want the lesson to stimulate awareness of the ICH. You want the students to be excited about the fact that they have a living heritage and that they may want to practice. And it happens that after discovering one living heritage in their class, some students were excited. They thought it was not interesting before, and then they tried it in class with a master, like for instance here in Kazakhstan, this one. And they wanted to, after that, to learn the music instrument. They thought, oh, no, actually I'm wrong. It's interesting. It's important to keep conversation open so that students can share their viewpoints, their ideas, their experience, and always to respect and appreciate the differences. Like some students may have different beliefs, different histories, different ethnic background, and in this case, it's useful to keep a good open atmosphere and tolerance. So sharing, mutual understanding instead of showing only the difference. I see there is a question for an interpreter. Yes. Masako Kato, do you want to say something? Okay, I don't hear anything. Okay, so to keep in mind that, of course, you will have spent time preparing your lesson or your activity in advance, but try to remain as much as possible flexible to adjust to the students, because often that's when the students get excited and start talking about their own experience, that the magic will happen, that you will see things coming out that you were not expecting, and that will really enrich the lesson. And I will show you later one of these examples of magic in the last presentation. Okay, so I think in time we are a bit short, so maybe we skip that one, or yeah. But we were asking in this poll about goals and learning objectives, and as much as possible, it's important that you reflect the ICH in there.
Okay.
So
To me, step 5. So thank you, Vanessa. And now step 5, we have 6 steps. We're almost done. And we will have some time for exercise. So that's why I think let's go through it now. Next slide, please. So step 5 is to design and share the experience. I will try to summarize each slide quickly. So basically, after we have done and implemented everything, right, we document it. So for the purpose of that, we can review it. We can try to replicate and try to redesign it next time. So we document the process, we document the outcomes to measure also the impact, which one of you have asked this question, but it's on the next slide. So after that, we can share our experience together as a teacher or as an educator on how we have tried, succeeded or failed at integrating living heritage in school. You can share the experience through these platforms, but I would like to go to the next slide to talk about this, a real case. So this is a workshop. This is a training workshop that comes in series for teachers and educators in Thailand and Lao PDR. So a total number of teachers that joined this was 60 teachers and educators. So with this, we use the interactive approach in learning what is living heritage and how the teachers can design, their activity in school with this. And through this participation, next slide, please. What we did in the workshop first is that we explored the concept of living heritage as we have done today in this webinar, but we had more time at the physical workshop. So of course, we try to understand what is the living heritage in the notions and concepts of both Thai and Lao teachers. In the end, what happened is that they found whatever examples or elements that they could come up with were actually very similar to one another. So they realized on the spot at the workshop the concept of shared heritage, that even though they come from different country, there's a boundary, a national border or a river that separates between the two countries, but the culture, the ways of life, the food that they eat, the textiles that they wear, even the language are very, very similar. Of course, they have their own unique differences. So in this process, they used the discussion and then they discovered themselves and they were able to reconnect together. Because just like the participants that have that are attending our webinar today, we might be defined, formally as a citizen of different countries, but we see that, we have really received influences from other cultures, and we are also influencing others. So in this process, they have reconnected. And so this becomes the main topic that the teachers would like to pass on to their students in their school activities, and also in their clubs and other curricular activities. So when they did this, they were later they thought about how to collaborate, and then they tried to arrange some kind of field trips between different schools within Thailand and also with Laos. We went to Laos and we went to a theater, a puppet theater. So the Thai teachers now are inviting the Lao teachers and the performers to come to their school or to arrange a field trip to bring the students to their theater to study about this. Next slide, please. So you can see that the learning process itself of you as a teacher or as an educator, you can share and also influence, share all the positive influences of education and living heritage to other people as well, by doing the documentation and creating some kind of dialogue with other people. So that wraps up step 5, and let's go to step 6.
Thank you, Nina. And yes, and it's very interesting to see that this teacher found by themselves without being told that there was this commonality. And often that's what could also happen in a classroom, that you will identify, like students start talking about something and they will suddenly discover that they share more than they thought, and it will create a new dynamic in the classroom. But several of you were talking or asking about evaluation and assessment. And so there are 2 aspects that we can consider here. One is the assessment of the learning outcomes. And this is, of course, as a teacher, what you are directly interested in. You have a lesson. Did the students meet the learning objectives at the end? And so you can, of course, have every school, every teacher will have their own assessments method, and they are totally fine. You can keep using what you're using. But what is interesting, according to me, is to, again, keep in mind this living heritage component. Like, can you identify ways in the essay you will give, in the peer assessment you will design, in the rubrics you will design, whatever you use, can you include questions to see if students understand the information about the living heritage, for instance, by asking them what they remember from it, what they understood, why they think it is important in their opinion to safeguard it, why they think this particular component was brought into this lesson. And do you have a feeling that students become more aware about ICH? So this can be done also by observation when you see them interacting. If you have a demonstration in the classroom where you can see how active they are, and if some of them are continuing to try to practice. And then a little trickier one is that the school activity respect the values of the ICH practice, respect the value of the community. And this may require a little bit more reflection. But for instance, we were talking about human rights, for instance, this Namsadam Nori experiment in Korea. And if you describe the process about human rights, you get students to reflect about human rights. You want that the process of the activity also respect human rights by being inclusive, by bringing all the students together, by giving the floor to everyone, by respecting the masters who have come to demonstrate, for instance. So again, it can be self-assessments through questions, through rubrics, through various tools. If you look at our resource guide, you will find a few tools like for instance, the 3-to-1 exit ticket, where you will ask students to show 3 things they have learned, 2 things they would like to try about this ICH, etc. So it's all about the same evaluation tools as you would use as a teacher for your English lesson or your math lesson or your scientific lesson, but by adding this living heritage component. And you can also observe the child development throughout the process, like the way they behave physically, socially, emotionally through the process. And then you may want to keep an eye also on evaluating the process, because if you, like the objective of this is that bringing living heritage will add value to your lessons. So you will spend time to design this new lesson, to teach them, to prepare resources. So you want to make sure that you're doing that for a purpose. So does it feel that the lessons are more fun, more interesting, more meaningful, or the students participating better? We have had some cases where a teacher noted that some students who are usually very quiet, very removed from the activity of the classroom, suddenly become active and become awake, and they want to share their experience. So it can create different dynamics in the classroom, and this is something you can observe. And of course, you can see if the results to your more summative assessment to your exams are as good or better. There was a test, for instance, a survey in one of the Korean classroom where they were actually trying to survey from the students their understanding of culture through the cultural heritage through the official school books versus through this practical experiment of the Lantern Festival. And it was clear that the results were much higher for students who had done the same content, but with their local practice instead of just reading generic example in the school books, in the school manuals. So you can talk to your students and ask them what they liked, what they think, why they think it was used. And you can also ask colleagues feedback, like it happened in Nepal, where some colleagues were attending the lesson to help and were also able to witness from an outsider's perspective and give advice to the initial colleague. So this is the question that we will ask you to reflect on. Doesn't need to be through a poll. I mean, we can launch the poll if you want, but this is for you really. What do you think would be the most suitable way to bring living heritage to school in your own context, where you work? What do you think you would start with? Would you start with a curricular lesson? So this is poll 6. Maybe we have to launch poll 7.
And also there are 2 questions in the chat, and that has been translated into Chinese, the English, and then one in English in the Q&A, just to alert you.
Yes. So I will. Voilà. So you can start answering this poll. And this is, again, no right and wrong answer while we try to answer the question in the chat. So one question.
Okay. Maybe I can address Jing Liu's question first. Or would you like to finish this poll first, Vanessa?
Go ahead, we can answer while people answer.
Okay, so it seems that ICH projects are mostly aimed at younger students. For high school students, how could we balance their time for preparing for the college entrance examination? So that's a really practical and realistic question. And of course, you know, students, high school students are really focusing a lot on this exam. Now, what I have observed, other teachers have done it. They shared that to reduce the burden of both the teachers and the students, and also the mental stress and everything, they use the what do you call multidisciplinary approach, which actually will be in our next slide, right, Vanessa, in our next module, that you can actually wrap things up and make everything smaller, more compact, and less burden by focusing on one living heritage, but connecting many subjects together. And then also reducing down the levels of complexity of each subject so that the students can have, you know, time to sleep too and to study for their exam. But that's just a quick answer before we go into specific
Yes,
case studies.
I can also add a few other things. It may be a matter of selecting carefully what is used, and some ICH components may be more suitable than others. For instance, let's assume you're a language and literature teacher, and the purpose is to analyze text. Whether you analyze random text or whether you analyze a poem that is part of the local tradition will not take more time for the students. The work can technically be the same. It's just that you're using a support that is directly related to their culture, and you can spend a few minutes to discuss about if they know this poem or this song or this written material, and in which context and how they feel about it. Similarly, I've seen example in mathematics, in quite advanced math classes, where they will do work on angles, and I will not explain you what it is because it's not my level of math already, but instead of doing it just with line on paper, they were using embroidery. So again, introduction to the embroidery was quite brief, didn't need to be very extensive, but the math work itself was exactly the same, and it was actually more complex than with just lines, because the lines are made as an exercise, whereas the embroidery is made by a human being and the angle may not be very straight, so you don't always get to an exact result. So it is possible to do that. It's a matter of selecting carefully. And
also designing the assignment so that the students can select to showcase their strength. Like as the teacher allows students to select, whichever format of project. So a student who would like to go to college in the Faculty of Communication Arts and Mass Media selected on how to do a project of documenting, making a short film about a traditional recipe. So in the end, the student, while as a high school student, also learned about the living heritage, completed his high school requirements, and then used that video as a portfolio for college, entrance. So that could be many tricks that teacher can design that will, one bullet hit many birds.
And so we can see from the poll that a lot of you are thinking that going through class projects, special events, or extracurricular activities or research projects, especially these two, are your favorite choice. And it is indeed easier maybe to start with than with a curricular lesson. And we like to talk about snowball effects. Often you try something and then you see that it works and it can encourage other colleagues to take part, or your administration to be more open to offer you space and flexibility. And so, of course, starts with whatever feels right. And then the important is to get started, to put the first foot down and to try. So now we are at the end of this presentation, and we would like you to do a little reflection actually after this activity. We will launch a tool which is it's on the platform Padlet, and you will see different subjects are there, and we would like you to write some ideas that come to you about the kind of lesson or activity you can launch, like what kind of living heritage you're thinking about and how it could fit to one of the subjects or one of the activity. So we would like you to take a few minutes to enter that. I think, if you can, please write in English. If you cannot, write in your own language, and we will try to capture the Padlet, and we will not be able to translate for everyone, but at least all the people speaking the same language will understand, and then we will know later. So Nina, would you be able to launch the Padlet?
Yes.
Yes. And
So,
in the meantime,
mhm.
maybe you can start thinking about it, and we can try to answer a few questions why
Yeah,
it is
we
happening.
we have really, really good questions.
Mhm.
I wish we have time for that, but let's go to Padlet. Now I'm going to send a link to all of you first. And Tana, please help me make sure that they get this link.
Sure, will do.
Can you see it? Can you
Yes,
see
I
it?
can see it.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Yes.
Then here, let me go to the page.
Yes, we can see so in the meantime, I see a question. There are many ICH projects that need specific environment and a place to practice. So when integrating with education, there are certain challenges, like how long the class should last, what kind of specific tools may be needed. Are there better solutions to these issues?
Or stop sharing first.
It's
Yeah, there are. So what you're worried about is, decontextualization, right? When you separate these two, all the components out. And of course, when we talk about living heritage, it's usually something that takes time. So you can solve it by breaking it down into smaller units of lessons or learning objectives. And how long? I think it's important that you don't imagine this if you're not an expert on that living heritage yourself. You can ask the expert, you can ask the community practitioner of like, if I want to teach on how to do wood carving, how long, or like minimal time, like how much do you think it will be successful based on your experience of teaching and doing this? And then that's about planning. You gather information first about what kind of tools would be needed, how many pieces of wood, how long does it need, that what kind of place they need to do the wood carving. So there are solutions to this called planning, right? As Vanessa has pointed out, doing the mapping of what would be needed, and then gathering information from the people who practice this living heritage to share their insight and idea as an advisor or consultant for your activity formulation.
You can also always start with something that provides, like with an activity that provides less constraints. So if you're not sure how it will work, you can always start by proposing a club activity and see how it works. And then it will be outside. You will not have the stress of the working hours, of the school hours. And once you understand better the dynamic of it, then maybe it can become part of another component of your, for instance, mathematics class, where the students will do something with it in your class.
And another question about, school teachers are not the one who make the decision of which living heritage to, use or teach in school. It's usually the executives or the management. So how to deal with this? Like, how do you build a relationship between different staff, which club to integrate or teach this living heritage, etc. So this is the Pandora box is like the most difficult question, but it's doable based on the case studies and projects that Vanessa, I, and Han have done. We have seen that, of course, you can start with the word called micro success. Micro success means you start something small and you make sure that at least you have another teacher or someone, a parent, or parent association or student or a community that are on board, that agree, want to do this with you. Start small and do it well. When you can do it well, you can use it as something to showcase and negotiate and convince the management for something bigger and bigger when you have this micro success. So it's doable. And just start with something small. Start with the people that really want to do with you first, rather than imagining how to involve the governor or how to involve the principal right away. If you're not very close to him or her, you can start with something small, a partner. Like in Thailand project, the Talao project started with just 2 teachers, 2 young female teachers who really like this and they're on board. And then when they work together hand in hand, they solve problems. And when they've success, they make the project bigger, and in the end, the principals, they're like, yeah, we like this living heritage, rather than choosing something that is very popular in a province. Let's choose this daily life living heritage in our daily life that is so simple. It's not expensive. It's not like on a national list even. So I think you can start with that strategy of micro success, the small one, find the people who want to work with you.
And then I see a question. Is the Padlet, can you access the Padlet?
Yep. Here we go. Now this is a Padlet. Shall I explain it?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so now let's get our hands on after you listen to our talk. Now we would like to invite you, when you click on that link that I sent in the chat, you will come to this page. What you do is that we want you to start this exercise. Just briefly, very quickly, don't be too serious. Name one or think of one living heritage and at least 2 subjects or core competencies or areas, or however your school call it, that you want to combine, to integrate, to put together to teach this. And for the sake of easy thinking, we just made 5 quick categories: art, humanities, STEM, social sciences, health, education, another. So what you do is like this: click on the plus. And when you click on the plus, please write the name of your country first so that we can know who's the author of this. And I'll write Han because I'm imposting as her. And then just write, what is the name of the living heritage that you want to choose? So I will say Gong, for example, and then format, like how will you teach this? Is it in the format of a project? Is it in the format of a school club? Or is it a whole course, or etc.? So maybe one whole class. And then
it can be something that you have done already.
Yeah,
maybe. Or it can be something that you are thinking of now that you've listened to us.
Yeah. And then after that would be like, what kind of activities or subjects you want to do? So maybe for Gong, Han would say that, oh, I want to use engineering class, if they're so called, to learn on how to, design a gong on computer program, for example. And then after that will be about history of gong. It's something like this, just very brief idea, and then click publish. Okay, so this is under, I have to change it. This is under, I put it under STEM. So don't worry, because sometimes you do a combination of, several fields. So it might be hard for you to fit into one specific category. Don't worry too much about the categories. So why don't we try? Can you try creating the link? Click on the plus. Write the name of your country and then your name, and then just answer, like, what is a living heritage? What are the subjects? And how will you teach it? Does anybody have problem with this? Can we have someone to start with this? Anyone? Let me see.
Okay, we will leave you a few minutes. Please do. And in the meantime, we can answer a few more questions.
Yeah, I see someone typing now.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, let's answer some questions.
Yeah, so I see one about how can traditional music, ICH, especially folk music, be better introduced to university campuses? It's difficult to answer for us because we don't know what your issues are. When you talk about improvement, we assume that there would be some issues and we don't know what they are. But from the perspective of the 2003 convention, I think we can say that some elements to keep in mind is that to keep in mind of looking at the meaning, like what Nina was explaining before, the why do people do this music? What is the meaning and value of this music? Usually a lot of music courses will focus on the technical aspects of the instruments, which is of course very important, otherwise you don't have the music, but the wider meaning of the different pieces can be interesting, and also understanding how the instruments are built and who built them, and different constraints and different specificities there can be. We can always think, of course, of inviting people, masters, and also trying. And another element we discussed very much at the beginning is that ICH is not frozen. So even if you introduce folk music, usually you have old pieces that are transmitted from generation to generation, but it's to see to which extent evolution of this music is acceptable, and that maybe it's not about keeping it frozen the same way as it was 100 years ago, but maybe introducing a new rhythm or a new instruments to enrich it, what is acceptable again to the community of players.
And how can you introduce it better to the university campus? Number one, what is your university campus like? What is the physical area looks like? Is there enough space? Is there some kind of historical environment there? What kind of existing activities or clubs or classes about traditional music is there? Or is there a gap, like there is no traditional music class in there? So this is opportunity for you, right? If they have traditional performance or dance, but they don't have music. So you can introduce it better by doing partnership, finding out who's doing what, and are they interested to, join efforts together to make it everything better. So like folk music, do you want to do it as a cultural event, or do you want to do a symposium? So I guess go back to your question, what is your university like? What is your university campus like? And who are already there? And what do they want? So you can design better according to the needs and also to the existing environment. Okay. Oh, we have some ideas here already. So if you want to click under art, you click plus under the art. If you want to do science, you click under science. Social, like that. Okay, so we're seeing 2 from China now under arts. And then 1 more from China under science, technology, and math. How about others? People, it's okay. You can take time to do this. We'll give you some time. And then after this, Vanessa, we're just wrapping up with the work on here, right?
No, we have the multidisciplinary,
the last
and
one.
multicultural. Yeah.
So maybe
another 2 minutes.
Yeah. So just quickly, what comes up in your mind? So from China here, Tian, living heritage, local dialect, format, older generation to teach in the classroom. Oh, so you want to invite the elders, the intellects to come to the class, and through the dialect song, through the activity and performance. Is this Tian Miao? And then China, Jing Liu, living heritage will be the lantern riddles. The subject will be about the ancient Shu kingdom culture and civilization in China. Activities, the learning, SS learning. What is SS? Oh, social science or learning, practice, competition, creation. From China, Damen is the changing face of the Sichuan opera. Format through workshop, you want to do a workshop. Activities like how to, let's do the DIY painting. And then rehearse on how to change the face. Okay. And I will Google this later. From this one under social science, we'll teach about the Qing dynasty of the Great Goal. You use AR and VR technology in interactive games, and you will learn about the history of the imperial examination. Okay. And from here. Oh, and you see you can comment on your peers as well. So we get Jessica to comment like you really like the idea of inviting elders to the class. Okay, South Korea. And then I think we'll have to do the wrap up, right? So in South Korea, you want to do the living heritage of Ganryang, which is a mass dance with acting. So the format is you want to arrange a field trip and a class, teach about music and PE since you're dancing as well, learning about the lyrics, the meanings, the resistance against decaded high class by actions, and then the field trip to visit the performers. Thank you very much. So we have some ideas here that you also get to continue in after this workshop, right after this webinar. So I will leave this Padlet open if you want to still work on it after this, but let's go to the closing part of our webinar today. So shall I stop sharing now?
Yes, you have to stop sharing so that I can share our last presentation. Okay, I think it's coming into slide into format. So in the previous presentation, we have basically given you the theory of the steps and the methodology that we have been using. But it's important also to try to integrate this approach into some more complex realities that we have been facing in the classrooms. And one question and one issue that came up quite regularly is how to teach with living heritage in the multicultural classroom environment. And that somehow relates to the cultural appropriation lesson, the question that we had at the beginning. Like, you select the living heritage of who? The one of you as a teacher, the one of your students, the one of several of your students, something completely generic and applicable to the whole country. How would if you select from the living heritage from the one group, how do you make sure that the others still feel interested and connected to this practice one way or another? And so these are some of the tips that we came up with. First of all, you could, for instance, select widely practiced elements and widespread celebrations. Like every country, every village, every family will have one way to celebrate birthdays, weddings, various family situations, New Year's, etc. So these are quite widespread. And if you select one form of New Year, and maybe not everyone will celebrate the same way, but you can use that as a starting point. And maybe there will be this big parade for the New Year, and maybe some students are not part of the community doing the parade, but they still witness it. They will still have seen it. Like, for instance, I live in Thailand for many, many years, I think almost 20 years. I am not Thai. The Songkran Water Festival is not my festival, but of course I know how it is practiced, and I also participated in it in one way or another, even if I'm not Thai. So I knew what people were doing. And because I am curious, I was also trying to understand why they were doing it. But it's still, even without understanding why, I still was able to go out and take part in the different activities. So somehow I felt connected, even if it's not my own culture. And if you talk about water festival in any Southeast Asia classroom, even non-Southeast Asian students will know what it is about and will be able to react to it. Then there are ways to host cultural days or festivals with participation of students and families where everyone will come and display their craft, display their food, display their songs. So you have multicultural exchanges. And for instance, in Belgium, they use one of these exhibitions. And from that, they selected one particular element, and after that, included that in some lessons. So that was a starting point of another project. You can encourage students to discuss and exchange information. The example of the opera we were talking about, somehow the one form of opera is imposed by the curriculum or by the book. You can start with that, you can study that, but then nothing prevents the discussion from moving towards other topics. Have you seen the opera? Have you seen other forms of opera? How do you do operas in this other region? What is the difference? What are the similarities? Is it done for the same purpose, etc., etc.? So you can have this comparison element, and then you enrich the discussion through that. You can encourage every student to research their own living heritage. So they can go alone or in groups, interview their families, and then report to the class. By reporting to the class, then suddenly you have all the students exposed to various practices, and then you have, again, a fertilization, a lot of exchange that can happen. Or you can have a rotation system, for instance. You can, in the first trimester, in first term, you use an example from one community, and then in the second semester term, you will use an example for another community. So everyone will feel included at one point or another. And of course, it can be a mix of that. You can start with different communities, elements in different terms, and still have this discussion and exchange all along the process. So the idea in a multicultural classroom environment is that the heritage will not become something that divides, but something that helps foster understanding, that helps foster respect, that will increase tolerance among the students, because they will understand each other better. And they may also identify that they are not so different. And this is when I was talking about the magic earlier, this is what happened in this classroom, where in Nepal they were talking about folk song and studying a folk song. And it was not the majority community, it was a large minority, I would say. The Tamang people were sharing one of their folk songs. And suddenly during the class, all the students started sharing their own folk song and teaching each other the folk song. And we don't have the videos here, we have it in others. And at the end, you see the students all singing together, which was a quite exciting experience for the teacher, who was not expecting that it would happen.
This another example of multidisciplinary projects with living heritage. So it's like a project-based kind of activity. So again, this is for grade 1 to 9, and then the work with the communities. Next slide, please. In Chiang Mai, Thailand. So this drum that you're looking at is called a giant drum, Gong Luang, and Gong Luang is as wide as like 8 meters long. Is one whole tree, just one tree only, and it's very old. So this is, you can see the Thai flags and also the royal flag put there. It signifies, that the community really give value to this Gong Luang or giant drum, and it has so many social functions.
Yeah.
And next slide, please. I get a good supporter. Next one, please. So I wish to see this is interdisciplinary because they use the drum, but to teach what? Biology about that solid wood, and I put the scientific name there. And also the cowhide, it has to be from a very specific cow breed, and also, female cow only, how old, etc., etc. The history and culture, it teaches that there have been passed on from generation to generation of this physical giant drum, along with the history, the collective memory, and also the performance of the drum for 4 to 5 generations. In performing arts class or subject, they learn about how to do the drumming. And then also there are other kind of traditional music that is being played and practiced at the same time. There are another kind called Glong Sabat Chai, which means the victory drumming. In the ancient time, before people go into war, they play this drum. And after the win, they will do this to celebrate victory. Of course, there's no war now, but they use that in other kind of occasions that will symbolize good luck, for exam or for any kind of like during the COVID-19, they do it like we want to win against the COVID-19. So you can see the contemporary social issues are still part of this, and they reflected in the history and culture class as well. In arts and crafts, the teachers taught the students on how to make the drawing. And then they practiced to make a smaller miniature version of the glong luong, the big giant drum. And the math teachers come in and say like, hey, don't forget about math. Let's do the circumference, measuring the length and also the circumference and also the width, etc. of this drum. So these are, next slide, please. So is the ideas of how you can use just one living heritage and to combine various disciplines together. So the students perform the traditional music with the giant drum. It has to be on a truck, it's so huge. And then there's also the dancing. So even though on this cultural event day, we see only the traditional dance, but remember that living heritage is not only about crafts. It's not only about dances. It's not only about music, but it's about way of life. But we can see only the tip of the iceberg that appears before us, just a performance, just the costumes, just the music. But beneath the water, the iceberg, the rest of the part, the big mountain is this ICH, other things. What about the sense of identity, that they are a proud community of Hanangao village, that they're also proud of dancing, that they're proud of making the textiles, that they learn how to do this and they come together. That really reflects the DNA of this village, that when there are any kind of events, they will come together to, join forces. So that's a social value that you could reflect through your class or through your curriculum. And that's it for my part.
Yes. Thank you very much. I hope that these few presentation and its few hours have given you some ideas and some inspiration. It's very difficult to condense this very rich content in such a short time. So we hope that we at least gave you the motivation to look at it and to think about it. And some of you did already through the Padlet. Thank you very much for playing with us on this. I would like to let you know that there are a number of tools that are able to guide you and provide you more information. There is a resource kit that is available in English. I think the link was shared earlier in the chat, so you can have a look. And this will give you a lot more examples and case studies, like real case studies, because this is really where your imagination can kick in. There is also an online course, which is available on the GCED online campus. It is available in English with a lot of videos. We go through the same content, but in much more detail with much more examples again. If you follow the course on the online campus, you will also get a certificate for completion, and this is automatically issued by the platform after you have finished all the quiz. And I would like to tell you about a Living Heritage Lesson Plan contest that is taking place, that will start and is open until the 30 September 2023. This is all through Asia Pacific, where we invite teachers to submit lesson plans that would integrate living heritage in their lesson. So you can see the application link here, and it will lead you to a form where you can fill in the information and also upload your lesson plan, knowing that there are a few funding grants that will be made available and a number of certificates that will be given to schools and participating teachers. So deadline for application is 30 September 2023, and we hope that we will see some of your lessons ideas coming up there. So in the meantime, I think we have answered all the questions that were here. We hope that we have given you steps. Are there any questions we have missed? I don't think so.
There's
But-
one question that, oh.
The last question from, I'm not sure which one it is because we don't see the names here. And I think we have.
It's a question of like, is there a group where we can continue to communicate in the future? This is from Peng Zhang.
Okay. So at the moment, there is no formal community created. This is up to a lesson that I will send back to UNESCO. It's quite difficult to keep these communities facilitated and animated. What we have seen is that more informally, for instance, when I was doing the project in Europe, teachers created an informal WhatsApp group and a Facebook page, and they keep exchanging information there. So this is something that may be of interest if a few schools in one country start the process. I think it's happening also like in Kyrgyzstan, where they have continued the work informally, creating groups and exchanging. Of course, we would encourage that as much as possible. But you can also connect to existing networks that may exist in your teacher surrounding, in order to start sharing ideas and with people of similar experience, and bring this topic to the discussion, for instance. Was that the question? I see another. Okay, so I'm stopping sharing now. I think we have covered most of the content, at least what we could do in such a short time. So thank you again for your time. I see the question I've just translated. Can everyone join a team in this competition? This competition is open to teachers in school. So you can be an individual teacher in a school, or you can be a team of teachers in a school.
You're welcome to join this contest. Showcase the way that you do it. Are there any other questions or comments?
I just scanned but could not open it. The link for the contest is also open in the chat box. I see that it has been.
Yeah, so on the information on the resources that
Yes.
Vanessa and Nina had mentioned was shared, so including the online self-paced MOOC course, the resource kit, and also the information about the contest. Unfortunately, that all these are only available in English, so we hope that you would have enough English proficiency to go through that. The animation series that Vanessa mentioned in the beginning, maybe Vanessa, if you could kindly share that on the chat as well, is available in all East Asian languages, Chinese, Korean, Mongolian, and Japanese. So that would actually be something that I hope that if you haven't seen that, then please come and have a look. It's a very nice series, and it captures in essence many of the things that Vanessa and Nina had already shared with you today. So I think we are already a few minutes after the supposed ending time. So it looks like if we do not have any more questions, then perhaps we could end the webinar here. If we would like to offer an extra service to the participants of the webinar today, If you would like to develop a lessons plan based on what you have learned today, or you can improve one of the existing lesson plans that you have based on what you have today, you could send it to us and we would be happy to comment on it for you. So I'm asking Tana to please share our culture unit email address so people can take note. And if you have a lessons plan, please share it with us. We would be very happy to comment to try to make you make the lesson plan better so that you can actually teach that in your classroom. And so please also join the contest because I think the seed fund is very attractive if you are selected, and you could also use the seed fund to pay for film visit for your students or to buy extra materials for your class or whatever the thing that you want to do. So I hope that is a good motivation for you to join this contest. And before joining the contest, make sure that you review what you learned today, looking at the materials that have been shared so that you can ensure the quality of your lessons plan to be submitted. So I would like to thank you very much to all the participants. I think we have done very well that despite all the complex 4 languages, 4 channel, I hope people know what channel they get into. But it seems like it's a lot more interactive than I expected. I was afraid in the beginning that, oh, nobody would answer a question because, oh, I don't speak English. Maybe I would not dare to ask a question, or I cannot speak up. I would not ask a question. But I think by whatever measures, we managed to really get a lot of questions raised, and our facilitators also provided excellent responses to them. So I hope that also help you to continue to deepen your understanding and to reflect further during your work. So just very close to conclude, and I would like to thank everyone again. Thank you very much to Vanessa and Nina. I think you outdo yourselves every time because you have done this workshop a few times, right? But I think every time there's new elements that you bring in, so it's very refreshing. Also, thank you very much to all the interpreters because you really help closing the language gap so that this knowledge and this content could be accessible to more people who do not have enough English proficiency. And also thank you very much to my colleague Tana. She has been really have a steep learning curve on the Zoom and on the languages, on everything, and it pulled together very nicely. So thank you, Tana. And yes, last but not least, thank you again to our supporting agencies and our co-host ICHCAP. We hope that we can continue to work together to really expand this knowledge in all the East Asian countries, but also beyond in Asia Pacific as well. So thank you everyone again, and wish you a very good evening. And we look forward to hearing from you with the lessons plan. That's how we count our success factor for this workshop. So look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everyone.